Just a little bit of facts. What does it take to get funding? If you're on this session today, it's because you're thinking about it as part of your runway. But it is a long road. According to Forbes, like the level of pitching that you can expect to do before you raise that money is that you're going to have to court a lot of angels. You're going to have to kiss a lot of frogs, maybe 70. And that is going to take over the course of 6 months. And in that time, you're probably going to do about 45 pitches. But don't be disheartened about that, because it's really about iterating, taking the learnings, learning from the other, from each of those investors that you speak to, and evolving your pitch so that you can increase your chances of success. But today we're going to give you some tools and some templates and some best practices that you can take forward that will help accelerate you through that formula to successful pitching. So let's have a look at that. But before we do that, just to introduce ourselves. So hi, we're PwC. I'm not sure how many of you on the call know of us, or you may have a perception of us, but we're an evolving professional services firm. We're really a technology solution provider. We're looking to disrupt ourselves and finding new sustainable ways to build business for the future. What we really want to do is find bold ideas. We want to find solutions that are human-led, it's really important, but tech-enabled so that there are meaningful experiences and sustained outcomes for everyone. We all are in the middle of, various, we're all aware of what's happening in the climate and society around us, and we all want to make sure that we're having a positive impact as we build our businesses. A little bit about myself. I'm Irish originally, but I've just come from 5 years being based in Manchester. I'm an entrepreneur. I have been involved in 2 startups and also have spent my time in Manchester building a startup incubator, helping early stage founders build their businesses from idea to launch. And now I've joined PwC in the Middle East to help them with that journey with scale-ups and those businesses that are at the tipping point of really hoping to accelerate their businesses. But a little bit about PwC in the Middle East. We're a market leader. As I said, we're the largest provider of professional services in the Middle East, and we support clients with a whole range of things, whether that's tax or regulation challenges, innovation, transformation, and then, things that we're traditionally known for, of course, audit, financial reporting, governance. So it's right across the whole complement of services, and it's also a cross-sector experience. So everything from financial services and the big financial institutions here to government, to climate, to oil and gas, you name it, we've been supporting them here in the Middle East for 40 years. But we have that exceptional network. And now we want to be able to deploy that and focus those efforts on the disruptive businesses that are operating in this region, and really to help encourage the homegrown talent. And we do that not just locally, but we actually do that globally. We have almost 750 offices in about 160 countries around the world. And we work really closely with our territory partners, because we're constantly looking for new potential fintech partners to build relationships with, to then extend out to market opportunities with our clients who are looking for that disruption, and we're trying to bridge that gap. So really we're using our brand to leverage yours. And then those innovation activities go beyond the network. So we have been a long-standing partner with Slush. For anybody who doesn't know Slush, it's one of the biggest gatherings of startups and investors based normally in Finland. It went online like everything else in our lives last year. And then other initiatives like Startup Nights, as well as our own global innovation challenges. And then where I come in is into this new part of the business, which is Pwc Ventures. So we really are trying to disrupt how we do business, designing new commercial offerings, helping to reflect the different needs and challenges that technology businesses face, but have the same challenges like any business has. How do I build better governance into my business? How do I make sure that I am complying with all the regulatory challenges in the geographic market that I'm operating in? But we're trying to do that differently. And what we're doing now is taking successful scaling companies who are on that tipping point to be real disruptive businesses and breaking the glass ceiling and the challenges that they have to reach the large corporates that they're trying to reach. And that's what we want to do. We want to extend that success to the wider community. And we're trying to do that based on sort of 3 principles. So we want to help build with you, and we'll talk a little bit at the end of the session about our scale program that helps you build and create the capability that you need to build to work with enterprise customers. We want to sell with you. We want to help build strategic partnerships and help connect the clients to these disruptive technologies. And then in the future, we want to invest with you. So we will be looking in the future in phase 2 of Ventures to look at the sort of possible investment into some of the startups that we've built successful relationships with. So that's enough about us. I'm now going to hand over to Tushar, who is going to take you through the next bit of the session.
Excellent. Thank you, Trish. So hello, everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Tushar Chaturvedi. I'm part of PwC's technology business. I'm a director in the firm, and I focus specifically on our financial services clients, which is why some of the input I have becomes relevant because you're fintechs. So a lot of offerings that fintechs have today kind of overlaps with what banks are trying to do. In addition to that, I'm also fairly active in the venture capital space outside of PwC. I do advise certain venture funds on selection of fintechs, and therefore I firsthand witnessed several pitches as an investor, right? And those are the insights that I bring in this session on how do investors look at pitches, so you can actually understand the other side of the table and basically polish your pitching skills as we go. So with that said, if we could go to the next slide, Trish. What's in a pitch? So essentially the idea is a pitch is not a detailed deep dive into your product, right? It is a commercial, right? It is the equivalent of what a scaled company would use as a commercial. It is to attract interest, pique interest, and be able to give certain basic answers to get a follow-on discussion, right? So you do not expect to close a deal in the first pitch. The idea being, if you can generate enough interest, if you can create a compelling enough proposition to the investors, you get a follow-on round where basically they would then ask specific questions and you can go deep into. So do not try to close it out in the first meeting itself, right? The pitch is just a commercial. Tell them the highlights that work for you are the compelling highlights, and then wait for them to basically show interest, right? So if it's a 30-minute slot, don't spend the 30 minutes talking, right? It's about 15 minutes of talking, the other 15 minutes to actually understand what are the areas they have questions in. And what's important is that you actually maintain a log of all the questions that you keep getting asked. Because as Trish mentioned earlier, it is a process, right? You won't necessarily get it right in the first pitch. But if you keep maintaining a log of what questions investors typically ask, you can keep modifying your pitch to be able to zero into something which is a very fair depiction and a very compelling depiction of what your proposition is. Before we move to the next slide, any questions so far on whatever I or Trish have mentioned?
I think we have you can speak even though we can't see you, or you can drop your messages into the chat. No, happy enough?
Yes. All right, so let's move to the next one.
Okay. So this is when we want to hear from you virtually. So if you just pick up your other devices or open up another web bar for us, we want to get a sense of who's in the room and what stage you're at to help us tailor these messages for you. So if you can go to www.menti.com and use the code 20607-987. And then if you can just vote for us. So I'm just going to stop share for a second and go to the actual. Oh, actually, I didn't need to stop sharing. This is the beauty of technology. So if we can ask you to just pop in your, there we go. We've got some results coming through now. Oh, so we've got a real mix here. So if you haven't raised any funding, you're bootstrapping. So just in case you're you're wondering. Okay, so we've got some post-seed, we've got right range here, Tushar.
I'm option 6.
I don't know where that came from. Perfect. Okay. So if we just pop back to the slides now, and I just need to go back here. So we do have a bit of a mix, and we'll try and tailor the messages throughout the rest of the session to all of your needs. So moving on.
Yep. So this is a very interesting statement, right? And it kind of speaks about the mindset of an investor. They are fully aware of the risks that are associated with investing. So they're not looking for a company which ticks all the boxes, while that is the ideal candidate, but they are aware that there are very few and far between candidates who actually tick all the boxes. So do not feel underconfident during a pitch that there are certain weak areas, right? Perhaps, financially you're not doing great so far. Perhaps, your team isn't that sorted, and that is fine. Every investor who comes into a pitch understands that there are areas which would not be their strengths, and the areas that would be the strengths. They're looking for the strengths. They fully understand, and every investor's mindset is that I'm looking for a 10 to 20x return on 10% of my investments, right? For them, the decision is not based on what you're doing wrong. It's more about what are you doing right. It's an investment with a long horizon, right? So as long as you can build a case for potential, that goes a much longer way than being able to say, hey, I tick all the boxes, right? So focus on what you're doing right, whether it's your proposition or the opportunity or the market or your team. Whatever you think is the highlight of what success, what would drive a success in the market, those are the areas you need to focus on, right? Because you only get stronger with your strengths, right? But do not do not get the nervousness of thinking that there are certain areas of my pitch which are not so strong. There might be several questions on it. That is fine, right? Those questions would be in the right intent. They do not in any manner dock you from an investment potential, right? As long as you're able to highlight what are your strengths, right? And that's what's going to get you through. So do understand that every investor who comes into a pitch room or a pitch meeting understands there will be areas that the startup needs to work on, because that's why it's a startup. It's not Coca-Cola, right? So there is a long area or a long roadmap of growth, and they're perfectly fine with that. So do not get nervous believing that we haven't fully baked this proposition. There are areas which are still open. Have those discussions in all honesty. As long as you're able to highlight the strengths, you should be okay. Can we go to the next slide, please, Trish? Right. So then comes the question, what are those areas, right? So what you're seeing over here are basically 6 boxes. These are the components of your pitch, right? And it's there are very few startups who actually get it right for all the 6 boxes in one go. The idea is, even if you're ticking 3 or 4 boxes or even 2 boxes, that's fine, as long as you're doing it in a right manner and you're able to project that in the pitch meeting. Not all boxes are equal, some more important than the others, and we will talk to them on the next slide, where we talk about what exactly does every box mean and which one's the most important versus the others. So Trish, if you could go to the next one. So this is where the discussion then comes in. The first is the team, right? So from an investor perspective, what I'm looking for is, do you have a diverse mix, both from a demographic perspective as well as from a skills perspective, right? Is it basically just a team of engineers, right? So it's basically just strong techies who are very obsessed with the product, but perhaps may not have the skills to actually make the market for the product, right? Alternatively, is it basically a group of business-minded folks and they don't really have strong engineering or tech presence in them, which basically to me would mean that they are relying on an outsourced company or someone to build the product, and they might lose the control of cost very soon, right? Alternatively, what could be a very good answer to the team box would be if you have somebody who's a serial entrepreneur, who's actually been through the journey, has done a few exits. That is a big plus, right? So if you can highlight that kind of experience, then that becomes something that you are checking. So team for me, and for most investors, is exactly that, whether the right level of skills and the right mix of skills is present. Now, of course, there is some premium on experience. But having said that, lack of experience doesn't necessarily mean a negative thing, because it also comes with energy. But as long as you have a good mix of people, a team is something that can work in your favor. The next bit is solution, solving a problem. This is where several pitches actually go sideways, in the fact that unless it's a very, very simple problem, a lot of fintechs are not able to articulate the problem very well. I'll give an example over here. There was a pitch I had attended about somebody building an information security product, which would essentially reduce the probability of phishing for household devices, right? Now, the way the solution was described led to so much discussion only on the problem itself that the company ran out of time, right? The problem wasn't articulated in an appropriate manner, and they were unable to actually talk about the product, the money it was making, because they just ran out of time. So the ability to articulate a problem is extremely important for two reasons. First is for the investor to understand, and second, if somebody is giving you 30 minutes or 60 minutes to be able to understand a problem, and if you're not able to make that person understand the problem, a person who actually stands to gain significantly by this investment, then it's going to be even harder to explain that problem to your end customer. What is the compelling reason, right? So this is a pitch not only for an investor, it's also a pitch for your end customers. So make sure you are able to articulate your problem extremely well. The third is the product itself. That is something which everybody in the team is fully well versed with, right? So I won't go into detail into that, but the ability to describe a product is the core of your pitch. The fourth bit is the money. Now, depending on where you are in your journey, of course, great financials always make a huge difference, but very few companies have them. Most of them are, either in burn mode or are just about breaking even. And that's a fine thing to say, as long as, if possible, you have a forward-looking plan for it. So your financial performance is one bit, but your pipeline is the second part, right? So now that pipeline doesn't have to be a completely vetted, qualified pipeline where it's like, I'm just about to sign a contract. Even if you have an active conversation, even if you have a slight lead, mention all of that on the same slide so that people can understand what the financial potential is, right? So if you've cold called 500 clients and there are 50 who have shown interest, just saying, send me an email and we'll discuss, you should be able to mention that, right? Because it's only when you have those names out there, you would see people in the pitch room, the potential investors who could say, oh, you know what, I know folks in this company. Oh, I couldn't figure out from your product proposition that this company or this person could potentially be a client. I'll hook you up. So that's what makes them understand the picture of your pipeline, makes them understand how much of the pipeline they can help you materialize, right? And that is the impact they can directly make, right off the bat. So make sure you can tell them as much as possible about what your efforts are towards making money, not just a graph of, hey, this is how much I've made, this is what I'm burning. It's an important part, but again, because this is a forward-facing investment, it's very important that you actually show that pipeline of the efforts you're putting in. Next comes traction, which is of course, again, a function of making money. So I won't go into detail into that. But the last one is probably the most important amongst all these boxes. What's the opportunity? Because it goes back to the earlier statement of a 10 to 20x return, right? If you're not able to describe what the size of the opportunity is, then it becomes a very hard question on, is there significant upside to this? And again, I'll give you an example on this. We were working with a startup which basically built an AI solution for being able to um, count the number of passengers in a vehicle. It was a single use case. They had a very nice solution, but it was focused specifically on being able to count people in a vehicle, right? And the pitch was, industrial security, etc., where you have a lot of people coming and going. This helps. Now, while there are several industries in the world, right, but their contracts are limited, right? So we're like, fine, you may get a few contracts here and there, but industrial security is so specific. And the fact that you are not manufacturing a camera, just a software, it's not going to land very well, right? There's very limited upside. But then they tweaked the opportunity by saying we can use the same AI to be able to count people in a shopping mall, to be able to count animals in a farm, right? And then it becomes a very different discussion where you can have everything from putting it on drones for monitoring farms. You could do it for regulatory purposes, health inspectors coming in. You could do it for industrial security, for commercial security. It just opens up the market significantly more. So you really need to think about your product and what its true market is, not of it, or not the market that stands today, but what the different flavors could be, both from a functional perspective as well as a geographic perspective. So once you have that, that is the picture you need to demonstrate to show, hey, this could really scale in different flavors, right? And that's completely fine if those features do not exist in your product today, as long as you can articulate it makes natural and logical sense. And this is how we plan to grow. So if you can show that a sizable opportunity, that significantly gives comfort to people saying, hey, it's not a one-trick pony. This thing can actually become big. Any questions about?
Can I just, yeah, I'll
course.
just add to that if you don't mind, Tushar. And I think it's one of the things that founders have fear of, is that when you know there's a gap in your founding team, that you don't have all of the pieces of the jigsaw, but particularly with the angels. And if you've done your research, you can identify the ones that can bring smart money. So that you know what your gap is, and you can actually demonstrate that and say, I'm talking to you because I know we've got this gap, but you bring this expertise and we want to work with you. Because investment and money financing is not always just about the cash. If most founders are looking for the network, the expertise, and it actually demonstrates, it's that little bit of vulnerability, isn't it, where you're saying, right, okay, we're not perfect. We're not everything, but no business is. And if you're in this kind of gig where you're fast scaling, you're always in a crisis because you're always trying to reach your next inflection point. And then just on the market and on opportunity, if you have demonstrated that the market opportunity is there and it can scale to gangbusters, then you also need to make sure that your business is scalable, because there's no point in actually identifying that opportunity and then not having the capability and the infrastructure to be able to actually scale up to take advantage of it. Any questions on that? Oh, we've got 2 Q&As. Tushar, I think we've got some questions in the box. I can't open them. Is there anything?
Where are they?
There's a Q&A button at the bottom. Or Jade, can you help us out here?
Oh yeah, I can see it now. Yeah. All right. So what is the right flow or order of all these topics? It's there's no flow. These are all components, right? So we will be talking. There is no set way of flowing a pitch deck, right? There are certain building blocks. We'll talk about it, but these are the elements. You need to capture all of these. All of these 6 need to be captured. To what level of detail depends on, again, how do you want to pitch this, right? If opportunity and market as well as your team is what your strength is, that's what you play on, right? That's what you talk a little bit more in detail about. Stuff that's not your forte or not your strength at the moment is what you downplay. And it's not about hiding facts, it's just about being able to highlight why somebody should be investing and helping you out. And that will only come from the things that you're doing right? So there's no flow, but these are all components and they should all be covered within your pitch deck. Market size, does it have to be in billions? How much is a good VC in, say, a B2B SaaS solution?
Great question.
So market size doesn't necessarily have to be in billions, right? I think it's more about the ability to demonstrate what kind of reach, right? So I think the pitch deck for Kareem, I guess, does not mention a market size in billions. What it says is, hey, these are all the sectors we can basically attack, right? So it shows scalability from a non-numerical perspective. So it's not that, oh, it's not as black and white as saying, okay, if it's a $10 billion opportunity, we go in. If it's 10 million, we don't. That's not how it works. Of course, if you're raising 5 million for a 10 million opportunity, then you have a different problem. But in general, it's not about the billions. It's more about being able to demonstrate how big it can potentially be in any way you choose. And how much is good to VC in, say, a B2B SaaS solution? Again, I don't think there's a straight answer for this, right? Because it depends on what software is this, right? Again, is it an industrial security software, or is it that you're trying to create the new next Microsoft Office, right? Because the numbers would be hugely different, right? So you kind of have to do a bit of a peer comparison. So an example for this for a B2B SaaS solution would be showing what other B2B SaaS solutions in the same segment are making, right? So just pulling something out of my hat, let's say CRM solutions, right? So if you were able to show, hey, these are the leading CRM solutions and this is what their current size is, then it gives an idea that you could take some level of market share over here, right? But at the same time, if you're talking about something such as mobile operating systems, right, it would be a very different number. So it really depends. You have to see what your competition is, and that awareness is important as well. And we see this all the time, where a startup will come and talk about, mention 3 different products, saying, hey, these are the ones we're competing with, and turns out they're taking the easier ones, right, or the smaller ones. There are actually bigger companies which are doing the same work as part of a more complex offering. So you need to be aware of that as well. The funding asked for different stages varies according to geography, right? Well, yeah, I mean, so if you say, for example, you were in India, right, the numbers would obviously be different, right? But that is also a function of, to some level, the population, the per capita income. So yeah.
Tushar, I think we'll move on to the next stage. I'm just
Sure,
mindful of time, and then we'll
sure.
finish off the rest of these questions at the end, if that's okay. So don't
Yeah, of
worry,
course.
folks, we will get to your questions, and we'll just run through this last little bit.
Yep.
Okay, so on to how to pitch.
Yep.
So this is how you do it.
All right. So let's move to the next slide. All right.
Here we
So
go.
the average time investor spends on a pitch deck is 3 minutes to 44 seconds, right? It's a very short time. Now, there's a very good, I mean, I could go through everything that's written over here. I could just tell you something which Woodrow Wilson said. It was basically, he was asked how much time does it take for him to prepare a speech. And he said, if it's a 15-minute long speech, it takes me 2 weeks. If it's a half an hour long speech, it takes me only 1 week. And if I can speak for as long as I want, then I don't need to prepare. The idea being the shorter the time slot, the more you need to prepare in the background, because you really need to be careful on what your key messages are and how you're going to basically put them in front of your audience. You don't need to adhere to a script. It's not that you're basically just rattling off something that you've basically mucked up. The idea being that you need to know what your structure is, how you're going to, what examples are you going to use, etc. So there has to be structure. It has to be well thought through because you have only one chance, right? So it is a critical pitch. It's a critical speech to make. So you can't just walk in and wing it. It doesn't work that way, right? So you have to firstly prepare, know what what your script is, rehearse it several times, and then keep revising it as you go. Because with every pitch, right, even if you are not successful in raising the funding, do not fail to get the lessons, right? So everything that's been asked, you need to make sure it reflects, the feedback reflects, because if nothing, it is very valuable feedback from people who are in the business and potentially know more about this industry than you do, right? So make sure that you do not lose the lesson. You make sure you keep sharpening your pitch as you go along. Can you go to the next slide, please? Right. So the first is the opening, right? And that is the first impression, right? And a big part of that is nonverbal, right? So make sure that you appear interested, you appear um, positive, right? And that the body language reflects the same. There's a very good video on LinkedIn by Tatiana Kolabu. She's a professor in I think Kelly School of Business, and she actually talks about at length, especially now that since we're living in a post-COVID world, most pitches are remote, on how do you appear interested while in a remote conversation, right? So I think everybody should have a look at that and pick up pointers on how do you actually start that conversation. I think while it's focused on interviews, but the dynamics are the same. So do that. Introduce yourself and be interested, right? A lot of people, a lot of founders I've seen take a lot of pride in the technical merit of the solution and feel that the solution talks for itself. Unfortunately, no. The solution does not talk for itself because everybody on the other side has come in cold, and the enthusiasm you show will go a very long way in keeping them interested, right? Otherwise, they could easily drift off. Can we go to the next slide, please? Style, right? So then, no script. That's the fourth point, right? So remember that, right? It has to appear natural but structured. Now, storytelling is obviously key. So the ability, and that comes to the point that I mentioned earlier on describing the problem and the solution, right? So it has to follow, a story structure where you can describe, hey, this is the problem that it exists today. This is how it impacts, and this is how we've tried to solve it. You can put in, an interesting spin to it on how did the company start, etc. What actually gave you the idea to actually start this? But as long as it all makes natural sense, right? So at the end of the day, this is about earnestness and being genuine, right? So make sure that your entire speech is structured in that manner. And like the last point says over here, right? Investors are consistently forming opinions, and to test this out, just probably for 30 seconds, right? Let's just go silent and think about what were the opinions that you formed about Trish and myself when we started this, right? So I'll just give you 30 seconds. Just think when you first saw us speaking, we were discussing about the Mentimeter and things going wrong, and then we started the conversation. What exactly was your opinion that you formed of us, right? So 30 seconds. All right. So whatever that opinion was, interested though as I am to know it, uh, do think about how did you actually come to that conclusion, right? How did we really materially do something to earn that impression, or was it something that you just saw us do in terms of body language or tone of voice, which led to you to assume something about us? And remember, this is the exact same way investors are looking at you when you are speaking, right? They are forming opinions about you, which could have nothing to do with reality, right? That said, make sure that everything that you're presenting is to your best, right? So everything you say is deliberate. Your body language reflects, your commitment to that entire discussion. Can you go to the next slide, please? There you go. So then that's the last bit, right? Questions. Anticipate them and write them down. And this is a continual process, right? It's very hard to be able to anticipate investor questions the first or second or third time because you're going in cold. This is the first time you're probably doing it, and a lot of questions you won't have answers for. But by the 10th or 15th time, you can anticipate. And that anticipation works better every time when you actually refine your pitch, right? You maintain a log of those, and you'll see that most questions are very similar, right? No time, and that's the reason that the numbers are the way they are, the way Trish presented them, right? It takes out 67 angels, 40 odd pitches, because you need that much practice, right? So it's a system, and you keep improving the system, and that's how you actually reach the goal. So it's just about that. Make a conscious effort to anticipate, and there was a very good point Trish mentioned earlier about knowing the investors. So if you know who are the people, you look them up on LinkedIn, and you see they're coming from certain sectors or certain industries or a certain background, they've posted something about a certain topic which is relevant to you, then you understand them and you are in a position of advantage when you're coming in because you're better informed. And not only will they ask questions, you can actually ask specific pointed questions to them saying, hey, Mr. X or Miss X, we would be, looking at you to actually give us more guidance of specific areas other than, of course, the funding. If you could open us some doors, we know you're connected to so and so, etc. And that then makes a very good impression because that means you've done your homework, right? And that goes a long way, in building a solid relationship with your investors.
And I think I'd
Right.
add to that, Tushar, when we talk about knowing the investors and making sure that, get over some of the obstacles of no's, get past some of the no's, like, I don't invest at your stage. I don't invest in your technologies. I don't invest that amount in one startup. Do your research and make sure that you're eliminating those so that you're focusing your attention on the ones that are more likely to say yes. And then it comes down to everything we're talking to you about today in the actual pitch itself. So doing your research, definitely a big thing. Okay, so I think we can go back to the Q&A. And whilst we're doing that, I think we'll try our final Mentimeter now that we've troubleshooted it. I feel like we should use it, Tushar. So if you have a look at the Q&A and for the participants on the session, if we have a look at Mentimeter again, so I'm just going to stop my share, and we're going to go to this one. If you have a look at Mentimeter, it should tell you that the presenter has just refreshed the slides. So if you refresh your device, it should say, what 3 things are you most struggling with for your businesses? So whether that's with your pitching, what are your pitching pain points? What are your funding pain points? What are your general business pain points? Just fire in 3 things into that in terms of, and we will try and answer those for you for the last 6 minutes of the session. So, Tushar, are there any other questions in the Q&A or the chat?
I just answered one. And I think there was just one more, which was pre-seed up to 500K seems common with US investors. Yes, it does. And again, it's a function of the market. Also, from a VC perspective, you have different constructs. You have the European construct. You also have the Anglo-Saxon construct, right? So what does that mean is that there are different legal frameworks that they're subject to, right? So while as you would usually see smaller ticket sizes in the European Union, with US and anybody who adopts the Anglo-Saxon standard, you can actually see larger brackets. Because sometimes, I think there is a certain type of corporate construct, I think they're called I think they're legally called investment companies. They can actually even basically invest with debt, right? So they can actually do leverage, and that obviously then increases those brackets. So it differs.
There's another question in the chat there, Tushar.
Not that I can see.
Oh,
yeah, there's one. Yeah. Would you be open to having a one-on-one meeting to have some guidance and advice on exercise? Of course, and I think Trish can talk about that
yeah, we're gonna.
in the coming slides. Yeah.
Yeah. So what other? We haven't got any answers in our word cloud. So if you just want to unmute yourself and maybe share your questions or pain points, what are some of the things? Oh, here we go. Mufid, you just unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, Patricia. This is
Hi.
Mufid from Untitled. Thank you, and thanks to Tushar for the great presentation. I have a quick question with regard to the market opportunity. Do you mean by that the total addressable market, the TAM?
Yes.
Okay, so now once you have your TAM, it becomes really subjective on the percentage, for example, that you feel like you're going to grab from that TAM, right? Like maybe 1%, 2%, 10%. So for me, sometimes I get confused, especially from an investor perspective. When you, for example, put 10% of the TAM, he will say, "Wow, this guy is very aggressive. He's dreaming." Or when you put 0.5%, then this guy is extremely conservative. He's never gonna make it. So my question to you is, I mean, what's the sweet spot? Is there any rule of thumb, or is it completely subjective depending on your business or the way as an entrepreneur you see it? If you can just shed some light on that.
Sure. So I'll shed some light, and then if Trish,
what's the Goldilocks? What's the Goldilocks? This one's just right.
So I'll speak purely from an investor's perspective, right? I think the 1% or 10% doesn't matter to me as much as the denominator on how big is the market itself, right? So if you were, again, I keep going back to the industrial security example because it's fresh in my head. If you were talking about something as niche as industrial security or material science or 3D printing, right? You could, if you were to take 3D printing, right? How do you come up with the total addressable market? Pretty much anything on the planet can be 3D printed now, which would basically mean the total addressable market of all industries on the planet, right? Or you could say, hey, I'm just 3D printing watch straps, customizable watch straps, right? So then it's about how well has the target market been articulated. That's more important to me, right? So if it's a guy who's basically saying, hey, I'm going to make 3D printers on the cheap, and I plan to get 1% of the total manufacturing output of the world, he is dreaming even though he's saying 1%, right? So it's about how well have you thought through that segment, the denominator. That's a bigger impact than saying 1% or 10%, because everybody knows, right? That scale, coming up with a product and MVP is easy. Scaling is incredibly hard, especially, and it's a function of the market you're in. So if you're in the UAE, right, which has a population of 10 million, right, 1% of the entire planet is going to be hard. But if you were a startup in, say, China or India or US, which have a significantly large population, it's slightly easier to do. Because if you were to get, say, 1% of China's population, it's probably still bigger than UAE and a few other countries combined, right? So it's that contextual awareness of where you stand, what you call as market is equally or probably more important than just a specific percentage number.
Thanks, Tushar. That's really great. I'm just mindful that we've hit the 45-minute mark. Are we okay for another 5 minutes today?
Yeah, sure, Miss Patricia.
Sure. We've got another question in the chat, and then actually before we do that, I'll just share the Mentimeter because there are a few answers on it now. So Tushar, we've got a few questions around regulatory or challenges around regulatory framework. So I don't know if the person who posted that wants to maybe just elaborate and explain on that for us a little bit. He popped in regulatory framework, and what do they mean? Maybe we could just have a wider conversation on that, Tushar, in terms of like
Sure.
How do you get your head around the GCC regulatory framework? Get help.
I'm struggling myself. I'm struggling myself. So it is complicated, but I think if there's any solace to be taken, it is that, especially for the UAE, the regulatory framework is way more friendly towards startup founders than in several other countries in the world. But that said, yes, of course, uh, usually you have specific advisors, specific companies who would advise you on what kind of licensing, etc. Depending on the sector, and as Trish mentioned earlier, the PwC construct can also help, right? So if you're part of the Scale program or you're part of the Align program, we can kind of help you out with that, because with certain regulations, we are very well versed with, right? So depending on where you need help with, and if you're part of the PwC network, we could definitely help you out with some of those obligations.
And then I think let's go with one more question in the chat. I think there's one more question in the chat, is there?
In your experience, how do investors in MENA judge early stage enterprise startups, and what metrics do they look for? I think that's an interesting question, right? Again, it comes to those 6 boxes, right? They're judging on all of those 6 boxes, and given the MENA construct, obviously one of the things that interests them is how does this apply outside the UAE, because the GCC is a very interesting market, right? It's a group of smaller countries, right? And if your minimum addressable market is the GCC to achieve any kind of scale, then it's important that whatever you're doing is permissible in other countries, right? So at a minimum, it is about how does it scale at least within a region level, if not outside the region. That's probably one very MENA thing that you should be looking at. Larger countries usually don't look at that as a metric, but specific to MENA, that would be one unique thing in addition to what the standard list is.
Okay, I'm just mindful that we've run over time here, so I think we'll just wrap up. So just to maybe follow on from the question that was in the box, this is how you will be able to engage with Pwc Ventures. So at the bottom there, this is what we're doing today. This is part of our community, and we engage with our Accelerator partners throughout the ecosystem, sharing knowledge, sharing expertise. We offer some, light advisory and some knowledge sharing and things like that. So, please come and have a conversation with us. We'd love to hear from you. And then going forward into 2022, we will be formalizing, as I mentioned, we talked about looking at things, doing things differently, and looking at different ways to commercially engage with the tech ecosystem. So if you are at that revenue generating, you're ready to scale, you've got a presence here in MENA, you've got a head count there, then there's going to be some opportunities around our scale initiatives, which is helping you build that capability to work with enterprise clients and dealing with things like regulatory frameworks and challenges. And then as you do hit that acceleration point and that you've raised your first seed, and there's a couple of you on this session that have already achieved that, and congratulations. And if you're in that fast growth, year-on-year fast growth, 20% growth, and you've got significant traction, particularly and some MENA customers, then there will be maybe some one-to-one opportunities that we can collaborate together in a more kind of creative way. And then those people will move, those types of relationships will move through over time into the PwC fund. So you would have to have an existing relationship with us because of the challenges that we have as an organization in terms of our independence. But you would have, those are the things that we're looking to really that excite us about engaging in the ecosystem in the future. So just to wrap up, we thought we always love to finish with some top tips, don't we, Tushar? So I think we've already touched on this one, and we demonstrated even with practice, things go wrong. So we should have probably taken our own advice and not used any tech. So that's a lesson for us for the future. But yeah, no videos, don't mess around with it, because you end up then being bogged down. It gets you flustered when it goes wrong. And make sure that you have checked your facts, because investors will have seen so many other decks before yours and will know and be able to challenge you on those. Tushar, do you want to take over from number 5?
Sure, why not? So of course, well-researched examples of the competition. I mentioned this earlier, but make sure you're mentioning all examples, right? Because if somebody comes in and says, hey, you've missed a very obvious competitor, it could appear that you're trying to basically just appearing a little more disingenuous. Then bring the team, absolutely, right? People like to see faces, and whatever team you've got on the team slide, if they can see a few of them in there and they're actively participating, then they're forming opinions for about everyone, right? And even if one of them actually creates a favorable impression, then that is something that you could definitely do with. Making sure your Twitter and website are working, obviously, that's the first thing most people will Google once they get a meeting invite saying, hey, someone's switching, let's check them out. And embrace rejection, of course, because there's going to be a lot of it, right? So make sure, and I don't think you should look at it as a rejection. It's more about the fact that, hey, you learned something, right? So it's a continuous cycle, and if it takes 50, 60 pitches, then make sure you go through those 50, 60 pitches and learn as much as you can, because it won't help you just now. It will keep, it's something which would serve you forever. And then, of course, get feedback from wherever you can. All feedback is valuable.
Yeah, perfect. So hopefully that has been helpful. There's a few more questions. Tushar, if you want to read those, and I'll just do the wrap up here. There's a few more questions in the Q&A. So this is the team. There's myself. I'm full-time on ventures and engaging and talking to the tech ecosystem, not just fintech, all verticals. So please find me on LinkedIn and connect with us, and my contact details are there. Tushar is part of the team and brings a whole wealth of experience, whether it's from what he does here at PwC in terms of the digital aspects of his job, or all the exciting stuff that he's done in the investment space. And then our leading team is Mark Stanley, who has deployed some very exciting disruptive solutions in some financial institutions. I guarantee you some of you are actually using things that we have worked on, and Mark and his team has actually deployed into the consumer market. And then, where this has all been driven from, the vision behind PwC Ventures, in terms of how convinced and committed that the business is to making these moves in getting more engaged into the technology ecosystem, with Mayar Ghazali as our leader. But yeah, I think that's it from us. These are, reach out to us here. This is the main email address for the Ventures team. Do follow us on LinkedIn and the hashtag PwC in the Hive, and share it out. As we said, investors are looking at your profile, and it'll help build your own brand, being associated, and that you have been a part of the DFC Hive Accelerator, and you never know who is looking at that and when. So Tushar, over to you for final words.
No, that's it. I think it was great meeting you and anybody, and I'm seeing a lot of questions, Trish, that have come in on understanding how can they engage PwC further. So this email address right there is the right place to reach out to. While Trish and I shared our personally email addresses as well, but this is a better place to reach out. So we have a more structured way of communicating. So if you reach out to this email address, we'll get in touch with you and we can take it from there.
And that's it from us.
So do we take the picture now, or what are we planning?
I'm not sure what we can do. Hopefully the Hive team have...
So the Hive team, have we sorted this out? If we take a group picture?
If anyone who wants to participate on the group photo, kindly raise your hand. I'll be promoting you as a panelist so you can turn on your camera.
Excellent.
And I will do the photographs. Hi, Sunny. Nice to see you. Nawal, hello. Yes. Hi, Ilker. Who else can we see? Everybody here, right? Hi. Lovely to see you.
Good to
Hope
see
you joined the session. You enjoyed the session this afternoon.
Yes, really well. Thank you so much.
Good. Lovely to see you as well, Sony.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for attending.
Appreciate that.